Good morning, everyone, and welcome to How to Best Use Your Best Life with us here, the team at Lumiant. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. We can see plenty of people have dialed in early, and this session is obviously being recorded as well for you to take back to your teams. But want to thank you for dialing in. If you're in Australia, thanks for dialing in on your morning. If you're in America, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks for dialing in your evening. Today, my name is Mark Ackroyd. I'm the Head of Advice, Delivery, Strategy and Innovation here at Lumiant, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm joined by our Chief Product and Technology Officer, Chris Dardedge, and our Global Head of Marketing, Ash Plaskett. So we'll be here today as your panel of experts from the Lumiant team to take you through today's webinar. So before we get into it though, everyone's in really good habits with Zoom now. They're saying g'day, but please jump into the chat box, say g'day, tell us where you're from. I'm in Melbourne. I think I crack this joke every time, but I just need to know if someone is in better weather and a better climate than I am. I need to live vicariously through our audience. Please tell me it's okay out there, because I'm sick of looking at overcast clouds. So I know we've got Tim Munro on the call. Tim, I'm assuming it's significantly better weather up there than what I'm seeing. Yeah, David, yeah, I'm with you here in Melbourne, mate. Yeah, it's brutal.
It's nice and sunny here in Sydney, but it's absolutely Baltic.
and you know, from an Englishman, Ash, you know, it's okay, excellent. Thank you. Great to see everyone. Today's webinar, I know, is something that we've all been waiting for, a bit of a follow-up from when we launched Best Life a month ago. People have been in using it for those of us that are on our professional package. And, you know we've got a lot of people that are looking at upgrading from starter to professional to get access to Best Life. So let me talk you through a little bit about what we're going to cover today. The session's going to cover a fair chunk of things, but we're going to probably carve out the majority of the hour today, spending time with Chris going through some live modeling scenarios. I'm going to spend the first half of the webinar today talking you through how to best use your Lumiant dashboard, use your Lumiant platform to set up your base case so that everything flows through correctly into Best Life, to then get into the more technical side of things with Chris, where you can manipulate the Best Life modeling tool to create the scenarios that you're looking to create, to have the conversations ultimately you want to have with your clients. So our agenda's on the screen there. I'll take a little bit through investment preferences and the Your Life survey, how they inform your Best Life scenario. We'll talk about how to bring to life the value of advice with Best Life. We'll discuss how you answer that question of am I on track through the on track score and the traffic light system that comes at the top of Best Life. And then we'll get into some scenario modeling with Chris and how you can talk about the trade-offs and scenarios. And as always, we'll carve out some time for Q&A. But as we go through this presentation, no doubt you'll have questions as I'm talking or as Chris is talking. Please use the Q&A function that's here on Zoom. So just next to the chat functionality there. If you pop that through, Ash is going to be keeping an eye on all the questions, and we'll either answer them directly in the Q&A box or we'll hold them through to talk live. So with that, let's just get straight into the content, which is talking a little bit about how we use investment preferences and the Your Life fact find. So if I go through here and just get Lumiant up for us. The key to the Your Life fact find and the investment preferences survey is actually trying to find the best way for you to, in your process, find how it figures out within your client experience, how you can have those conversations up front to set up the Best Life modeling scenario. What's really interesting is the Your Life survey straight away starts feeding in information into your best life scenario. So when you get into it, and I'm just getting our clients up here, what you'll be able to do is by enabling the financial fact find function of your survey, your clients can start to give you financial detail. Now, this will absolutely start to sort of fill out as governance comes through, but right now you've got everything that you need to do a base case scenario. So can everyone see Avery and Morgan Brooke Lewis on the screen? Fantastic. So what you're looking at here is your client dashboard. So you'll all be familiar, but I'll go over some old ground, hopefully, if you need to, which is the Your Life survey. Now, the Your Life survey, you do that through the dashboard here. And what we're talking about when we talk about the financial fact find is you need to toggle on this financial fact find included button. This is really important because by giving the clients the option to give you the financial fact find, you'll be able to get some of that data that'll pull directly through to your best life scenario. So when you toggle that on, your clients will see a screen as they're going through Your Life, which asks them to share any extra financial details. And when they share those financial details, they pop through in two key scenarios or two key areas. So first and foremost, in the Your Life module, no doubt, as you're all familiar, you'll see all the 8 dimensions of well-being, but you'll see their household details down here. So these are the financial details that come as an output of the Your Life survey. They're interesting here, and no doubt you'll unpack them in your discovery meeting, but where they become most pertinent and the context for today's conversation is all of these actually pop through into the best life scenario automatically for you to run your base case. And we talk a bit about base case when we're talking about best life, because our view as we get into it is it's always great to start with a base case of if you did nothing based on the goals that you've told me so far today, this is how on track you're going to be to live your best life. And then you can start to show the value of your advice as Chris gets into it around modeling some different ways to allocate your surplus income. What if we made some budgetary choices? What if we made some certain trade-off decisions? So to recap, first thing that we need to do is toggle on that Your Life financial fact find so that we can start to get those household details. That gives us a really good start to the base case. The next question we often get asked is, does investment preferences make a difference for my clients? And how does that help me with my best life scenario? So the interesting thing about investment preferences is it actually doesn't inform automatically the best case scenario or base case scenario or any scenario, albeit. What you're going to use your investment preferences conversation for is to get a sense of what's most important to the client's investment preferences, of course, but we know that that's a risk profiling conversation. So with the risk profiling conversation, it's going to give you the opportunity to start to understand, are they growth-based investors? Are they defensive investors? What type of investors are they? So when we understand that, we'll be able to, and I'm just logging back in here, we'll be able to understand what's most important to the client when it comes to their investments. And we'll run a base case scenario based on, what's a common risk profile there. And we know that the most common risk profiles there is 70-30 type profiles. So if I get back into our test clients there, and get into best life, what you'll be able to see with Avery and Morgan is we've currently got them 48% on track. And that's on our base case scenario. So if I just pop down into our base case scenario, some of those household financials that came through from our Your Life survey will pull through here. So things like their age come through, things like their income come through, things like their total assets come through, all from that initial life survey. And we can obviously override that. So when you think about investment preferences as well, so if I go back into that screen, so there's your household details. If I go into investment preferences there, your investment preferences, as I said, will show some of the things that are important to them. But what's probably most important is all these risk profiling type questions there, so that you can start to set a baseline of what's the risk profile I'm going to plug into Best Life when it comes to my base case scenario. At this point, we've done a growth portfolio 75-25, and they're based on our capital market assumptions, of which you can configure your own by supplying them to us. So let me talk you through the Best Life screen in its high level functionality, and then I'll hand over to Chris to do some more complex type scenario modeling. So when we run our base case and all our sort of goals are fed through in there, our Best Life scenario will give us our on-track score first. So on-track score, the best way to understand that is 48%. Means that out of the 1,000 Monte Carlo scenarios that we've run as part of Best Life, 4,800 of them get the client to the point where they meet all their goals and don't run out of money at life expectancy. Now, the flip side of that, and the obvious way to explain it is, there's 5,200 scenarios where they run out of money. But the best way that we've found to present this and talk about this is it's actually, you've got a 52% chance of adjustment. We know that plans need adjusting every year, every 6 months, every quarter, and that's what you do so well with your as advice professionals. So by positioning it away, we've got a 48% chance of making all of this work, 52% chance of adjustment, positions the ability for you to provide the value of your advice. And obviously this is a base case. So as Chris talks about how we might be able to amend the budget and amend some of your strategies, we can see this go up from here. The other thing that's really important to get right as we run our base case scenario in Best Life are our goals. So a couple of things are really important with the goals. For those of you that like the vanity like myself and like the romance of financial planning, a couple of things here. You'll notice that we can add images on our goals here. So to do that, when you're in your goals module, when you're talking through your value session, you unpack some goals with your clients, you can add images by clicking your little drop-down box and getting down to the bottom and adding an image down here. So we would recommend you do that. So we've got a school bus that represents paying for Blake's private school. Maybe you have a picture of Blake. You can have a bit of fun with it. We know the more that we help visualize the goals for our clients, the more engaged they are at fixing their plan. So whilst we're on this, there are some key inputs to the goals that will feed through to our Best Life base case scenario that you should be doing every time you do it. And there's a couple little tricks of the trade here based on the way that we've set up Best Life version 1. So there's some obvious housekeeping and hygiene here. We need your goal to be, we like it to be really specific to that client. So your goal title here, pay for Blake's private school, is really nice, really personal, and that's how we bring to life that advice. Is it to do, doing, or done? Who's it assigned to? Is it for both clients or just for one? And then these are the keys for the Best Life scenario. When is that goal going to be completed? So 1st of February 2025. And as a result of that goal, are we going to have less money, more money, or is there no financial impact to that goal? So obviously with Blake's school fees, we're going to have less money. It's going to cost us $30,000 a year, and it's going to be recurring. And it's going to recur annually, and it's going to recur for the next 6 years. So the way the model will feed that is go, all right, so based on this date, every 6 years, I've got to take out $30,000 out of the modeling scenario. And Chris will show that as he gets into the spreadsheet a little bit later. But these are super important. So if you get these bits right, they'll feed through automatically into your modeling scenario so that when you run your base case, you'll be able to go, right, based on all the goals you've told me and the money we need to allocate those goals, in this instance, we're 48% on track at hitting all of those. Now, a couple little tricks of the trade here that I will speak about that might be tripping some of you up based on the way that it's built at the moment and it's still really fresh. retire comfortably. Now, as advisors and accountants, we know we've been really well trained at talking to people about when do you want to retire at age 65, potentially, whatever that might look like. How much money do you need in retirement? So we're really good at getting that, let's say, retire at age 65 on $52,000 per annum goal. And we usually type that in. And for a best life scenario, we would want to say, okay, well, what's the date we want to retire? And our natural inclination is to go, well, it's a financial goal. It's $52,000 per annum. And it's recurring every year for the 30 years of my retirement. Now, Best Life Modeler is actually a retirement-focused modeler, because the way the Monte Carlo simulation works goes at your retirement age that you dictate how much retirement income you're going to need. So what we suggest and how we've built it is when you're having these retirement goals, and here's a little trick of the trade, have it as a non-financial goal in this section, in the goals module. Because when we get to the Best Life module, we're actually plugging in already a retirement age and a retirement income. So let me go over there now. So if you go and have a look here at the retirement information, we're saying we want to retire Best Life in our Best Life scenario at age 65, obviously until life expectancy, and we have a retirement income. So all of this actually feeds into the Best Life model, obviously, as it's here. So what we're trying to get you to avoid to do is, if you actually include it in the goal on the previous screen, your modeling scenario may break because it's double counting. Because the tool is going to look at that goal at retiring comfortably. If you have an income in there, it's going to count that at the certain age and date that you've done it. But it's also counting at this, on this screen, that at age 67, we're trying to get a retirement income of 150. So let me recap that, because that's a little bit of a tricky scenario there. When you're putting in things like retirement goals in the goals module, the best thing for you to do is not attribute a cost to it, because when a retirement goal gets into Best Life, we're already inputting a certain retirement age and a certain retirement income, and the modeler is going to work that out itself. We don't want to double count by also adding a financial value to this retirement goal. So a little bit tricky, but not insurmountable.
And just for our audience, Mark, if you go back to the Best Life screen with the retirement income, just to confirm for them, that retirement income is for both couples that they input in there. That's that overall household retirement income that you're including in the model.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Perfect.
So it's a total cash flow modeler, right, Ash? So what it's doing for you is going, as a household, let's lump all our assets together, all our cash flow together. We're putting our tax rates together. And by the end of our life expectancy, what's the likelihood of us achieving all the goals that we've told you and having a little bit of money left over there? So let's go into that then. This is how your Monte Carlo graph looks. The key thing I like to look at with the Monte Carlo graph is this little red line. That's when you're running out of money. So ideally, as clients, we want to try and train them to look at, is our purple line, our optimal case, above that red line for as long as possible? So obviously we can see here with Morgan and Avery on their base case scenario, we actually duck into the red far before Morgan's life expectancy, which is what's driving that lower on-track score. So you can get as in-depth or as high level with your clients as possible. But at the most high level, I think we best train our clients to go, are we getting that line all the way over to life expectancy? And if not, we've got some work to do. You've got your base case financial inputs, as I've mentioned already. So where we've got them through the Your Life survey, they'll populate through already. So things like the age, things like the income will populate through. But once they've populated through, and Chris will show us how to manipulate this shortly, you can override those things as you start to get into your more complex scenario planning. So their assets will come through, but then you might want to split them out as you see fit. Your retirement information comes through, so your superannuation balance comes through, and you would then dictate if there's any fees that you want to attribute in your modeling, your retirement age will pull through, and your life expectancy is auto-generated, as well as your pension age, but you can sort of toggle that on based on your expertise as well, and what your income is required in retirement. You've then got your allocation strategies, and Chris will take you through how you can use these to manipulate your scenario. But there's a default position there that shows, putting everything into cash savings, because that's your best way to show the value of your advice, by saying if you did nothing and you let your annual savings build up in cash savings, you can that's how likely you are to meet your goals. But hey, you're now seeing me as your accountant, your advisor. Let's talk about some ways that you can do it. You then reduce your shortfall retirement allocation strategy, and we can sort of show how you can manipulate those up and down to change the order of that. The way to think through this is like a waterfall, and no doubt Chris will take you through that in a second, but it goes through buckets. So where's, in the excess cash allocation strategy, where's that first bucket getting to? So in this instance, we've only allocated one bucket, so everything tips into that. If we then tipped in investing, it would fill up the cash savings bucket for as much as we dictate it to, and then it would start filling up the investment bucket. Vice versa, when there's a shortfall, it will take from the salary bucket. As soon as the salary bucket's out, it would go to age pension, then cash savings, up to the amount that you dictate as well. If you've got a business, you can chuck in the business value and growth rate of there, so you can see the value of that asset over time. And then probably the hero to all of this is the household cash flow table. So this populates through all the inputs on the sections that we've had before into the Excel spreadsheet. And then from that Excel spreadsheet, after you run your base case, you can start to manipulate things like your income amounts, your expenditure amounts, if we're saving more in a certain year versus another year, if we're getting less income in a certain year versus another year, so that we can start to get that more personalized scenario. And then the last thing you do is give yourself a model name, so that you can hold that at your scenarios at the top. So you'll see here we've got a few scenarios: base case, savings, debt management, and career break. And then you also apply that risk profile. So you might want to apply it on a risk profile that reflects their current investment setup pre your advice. And then you might want to change that reference model profile for if you're showing the impact with your advice. And then you hit your run projection. So that's the basics of Best Life. To recap, before I hand over to Chris, couple little things to get right when you're setting up your Best Life scenario. Turn on that financial fact find in the Your Life survey. The information that comes through there will populate for you and give you a lot to run into a base case scenario of your Best Life. Use your goals module really well. So tailor your personalized goals. Use things like your imagery so that you can get your goals timeline right. Make sure you've got values attributed to sort of your lump sum goals. So things like, buy a car, things like education, and even things like when we're looking at investment properties or purchasing a property, you treat them as a lump sum goal with your household deposit. And we'll talk about how you might sort of navigate the debt increase from a mortgage repayment perspective as we get through the scenarios. The trick to the goals, remember, if we're doing a retirement goal, have that as a non-financial goal. So don't attribute a value to that, because we're going to attribute a value to that within the Best Life scenario. So with that, Chris, I might hand over to you and get you to screen share. Ash, have we had any questions through that I can sort of help answer as Chris is getting that screen share up?
Not yet, but obviously, guys, as we go through, if you have any questions, throw them into the Q&A chat. We're happy to answer them as we go through, or online via text or at the end. So please do jump in. If anything that Mark says or Chris says piques your interest or has a question off the back of it, feel free to chuck them in and we'll get them answered.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Mark, just to double check, you guys can see my screen?
Yeah, sure can, mate.
Yeah, perfect. All right, thank you. Awesome job, Mark. I mean, you've kind of made my life easier by covering off most of the things on here. So I'll kind of I'll reiterate a couple of things and also kind of jump into some of the kind of plans in terms of what we're doing around this space. So as Mark mentioned, it's really important that if the client does complete the financial fact find information, most of the information required for the base case will be captured automatically and come through. We're currently in the process of adding in the 1 or 2 missing pieces of data. The really obvious one is the required retirement income. And the reason why we want to add that to that financial fact find is it will mean that right off the back of your client completing the Your Life questionnaire, we'll actually be able to present them with a document that not only shows them the full summary of their Your Life output, their score, what it means, their key areas to look at, but it will also be able to automatically run the very same base case that you're seeing here that we ran for Avery and Morgan. And so right off the bat, they have something to give them an idea of, given everything so far, how am I doing? The other thing worth kind of mentioning, and we've done this for a number of practices, is at the moment, as you would have seen from Mark, the financial fact find is optional. It's optional for the advisor to actually select whether or not they want their client to see it. And likewise, it's also optional for the client. So even though the advisor may have said, hey, I'd love my client to complete this, the client can actually opt to skip it. We do have a setting available that says if you want your client to not be able to skip it, i.e. you want to be able to capture all that information as part of that journey, you can do that. So speak to us separately and we'll make sure that's enabled for you and your practice. Very important, obviously, if you want to try and capture a lot more of the information up front so that you've basically got everything ready to go. So I think Mark did a really great job of explaining the on-track score. The only thing I'll kind of mention, in addition to it is, keep reiterating that message back to the client, which I'm sure you already do. This isn't a set and forget thing. Markets move all the time, as we're seeing right now with tech stocks in particular being rampaged, to say the least. You can't just make a few assumptions and then go, well, job's done. The whole point of this is to keep showing the client that, given all of the movements in the markets and anything else that's going in their life, are they still on track? Because the market may have fallen 20%, but if they're still on track to meet their goals, it doesn't really matter, right? It's not going to impact them in any serious way until it impacts their goals. But it might be an opportunity to have a discussion around, okay, now that there has been this market movement, is there anything extra that we should be doing? Are there additional strategies that we need to employ? Is there anything else that we need to take a look at? In terms of the actual projection chart itself, so Mark kind of covered off the really important part, which is the score that you see at the top comes from this point here. And so out of the 1,000 scenarios that we run, and it is purely Monte Carlo, I like to iterate that because we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the actual amounts are going to be. We can't predict what the markets are going to do. So each time you hit that run projection button, the actual amount is going to change. It's going to be roughly in a fairly close ballpark figure, given all the capital markets assumptions, but it will change as you expect it to change. We do show an 80th percentile optimistic case and a 20th percentile pessimistic case on there. We can obviously adjust those. A lot of professionals like to kind of show kind of almost even 5th and 95th percentile to really show the two extremes in there, which kind of widens that chart a lot more. We went with a more conservative approach here to basically go, if you go between the 20 and 80th percentile, you'll know relatively accurately, or at least with a lower error margin where you're likely to end up, which is probably the more important thing to talk about rather than trying to optimize for outperformance or underperformance in this case. Behind all of this is all of the data in this report. So this is used for two things. One, it kind of gives you the full breakdown of all the information that has been fed into the engine and what the engine has calculated and thrown back at you, which means that you can always double check the data, you can audit it and the rest of it. But it also gives you a few key pieces of information that haven't yet made it to the front end. And that is the actual breakdowns of each of those data points. So at the moment, we just show you the sum total, whereas actually for every year, you can see what actually made up the cash flow in that year. How much of it was your super, how much of it was your investments, how much of it was cash in your savings account, how much of it was other proceeds from assets that were sold, etc., etc. So this spreadsheet lays it out very similar to the cash flow spreadsheet that Mark showed before, by year on the left-hand side, and it has all of the details around, in this particular case, the client's superannuation, and as it's going up over time. The figures that are included here are obviously based on the projected likely return for that portfolio. And what we do basically is we take the total sum of cash and we split it into the strategic asset allocation that you've selected from the model portfolio at the bottom. So what we're really trying to say there is we effectively model it as if you're doing a full rebalance on an annual basis to bring the portfolio always in line with your strategic asset allocation. And that's probably a smart thing to do. It incorporates inflation, it incorporates tax on earnings, and it incorporates, what was I thinking? Tax, inflation, and any other kind of changes that may have occurred during that year, including contributions, obviously based off your income. So all of that is included in there, and you get a projection for what it is. Client summary, whether or not an age pension was calculated, and I don't think there's a few numbers there you go further on when they're not earning, it actually calculates it. All of those are regionalized. So at the moment, we've got it configured for Australia, New Zealand, and the US. And that's from a regionalized inflation, regionalized property return, regionalized what else is there? There's a few other kind of data points in there that are kind of, social security, in terms of, ages of when you can actually start to get social security. What do those payments look like? All of that information is automatically captured there. So one of the things that Mark mentioned further below in your retirement information is you can adjust that to whatever you like, but if you adjust it to a figure lower than what the social security rules are around it, the engine won't just assume that you can get paid from whenever you entered in. It will take into account the actual social security rules in play. Similar thing to being able to access your superannuation. So that's one of the ways that you can access a shortfall in cash. But obviously, if you're not at an age where you can actually access your super, the engine will not utilize it. So this goes across in terms of the partner's income superannuation. It shows you the household assets. You'll notice that we automatically, by default, have a CPI decrease in value of assets over time, just because assets tend to depreciate over time. Base case scenario, Avery and Morgan have a $30,000 debt. They haven't applied any strategies around managing that debt. So as you can see, we just carry that debt forward by default in the model. Likewise, their property, so your principal property, if you have it, it gets calculated automatically over time. We are using the 25 or 30-year national average per country. We are going to, as part of governance, going to be able to capture the address of your property and therefore be able to apply the more specific state or city specific data for this rather than using the national average, which is obviously varies quite a lot, well, in every country really. The US quite a lot, but even in Australia, there's quite a substantial difference. Household debt, once again, by default, in the base case, we're not putting any debt management strategies in. And so therefore, it assumes that by default, you're not paying down any of your home debt. You know, you would kind of want to adjust that because everyone tends to pay down their home debt. But to keep it nice and simple, we're just basically saying carry that debt forward. In this scenario, Avery and Morgan don't have any investment properties, but there would be a similar calculation done on this side. They've got some investments which they're using to cover some of the early on charges of paying for Blake and Blake's education. Any additional household income. So for example, if you have an investment property or some other asset that is providing you an income that isn't directly attributed to either the client or the partner, you can enter that here, and I'll show you where that field is below. Obviously, as part of governance, we'll have all of the tax structures in place. So we'll be able to attribute that income to the tax structure and obviously apply the appropriate tax to that as well. Really big thing, and I'll show you this in the second scenario, is whether or not you're saving any money as a household. So base case is you're using every single dollar that you earn in one way or another, and basically at the end of the year you have no excess cash to save in any way, and so therefore you're spending everything. We've got two additional columns in that spreadsheet below, and it talks to additional contributions or withdrawals. So things that you know about or can in some way predict that there's going to be some sort of cash injection or cash outflow at some point in the future. It could be money that you're expecting from the proceeds of a sale that's outside of this. It could be from a will, it could be from a gift, it could be for a whole range of things, or it could be to fund certain things, as I'll show you. Mark also mentioned the business valuation. So if you've got your business in there, you can enter in a date that you predict that it will sell. And obviously the tax to be calculated on the sale of that. The engine will automatically calculate its own business valuation. If you choose to override it, it will use your overridden value, and then obviously inject the cash that post-tax into the model. And then obviously required retirement income. So whilst they're working, there isn't one required, and then it starts off $150,000 and starts shrinking going forward. I'll explain that in 1 second. And then the rest of the model here is effectively what the Monte Carlo analysis does around likely optimistic and pessimistic cases around cash balances. So the likely cash that you have, but also your net worth. So one thing that's really important to note, and we will shortly have a second chart to kind of flick between, is this chart that comes up here is purely cash flow. It doesn't include your home. It doesn't include your assets in there. So you might have a lot of assets. You might have investment properties. You might have a house. It doesn't come into this. This is purely from a cash flow perspective. So even though here you can see that we're actually running out of money, in theory, one of the strategies might be to downsize. Sell your home, move to a smaller place, and therefore that will help fund the fact that you're under. Once again, that's a discussion for you to have with your clients in terms of how they want to structure that. So very quickly, I think Mark covered off most of these inputs in terms of the age automatically comes through from the dashboard, which Mark showed, or the client can also enter that in during the Your Life survey. So if you're using Your Life as a way to attract leads and opportunities into your practice, and you're using that as that first communication point, that individual can obviously provide that information automatically for you, and this will flow through over here. By default, the income that they put in will get entered in. I've overridden this slightly just to give them a little bit of a better score. You would have, for those that have been in the previous webinar, you would have seen that previously we had this option of having a drop down to adjust the client income rates over time. So rather than having $170,000 until they retire, this allows you to adjust. We've moved that to a dial now, just to give you that finite control over. You tell us, rather than us saying it's going to be at CPI, you kind of, based on your knowledge of the client, adjust it to see how you see fit. And it can both increase and decrease over time. It may be that you've had a discussion with a client, and actually they want to start moving to a 4-day week or whatever it may be, and therefore actually their income is going to decrease over time. Not a problem whatsoever. That's all in your control. Household financials, I think Mark covered off really well. The 2 points that I'll make here that flow into the cash flow Excel spreadsheet is any excess household income, put it in here. And likewise, and I'll show you this on the second scenario, if you've discussed a strategy or if the client is already saving some money, put it into here so that the engine knows that they're at the end of the year, there's a certain amount of cash that's available for it to utilize. The other point I'll make is, just before I move forward, is there's a question that we always get around what happens if my client hasn't set up everything inside your wealth. You know, can we still utilize this? Because, you know, I don't know what their investment balance is. I don't know what their superannuation makeup is. I don't know what holdings they have. And the answer we have at the moment is that from a modeling point of view, it really doesn't matter that much. All we really need is 3 pieces of information. We need to know what the balance is, what the fees are in order to calculate a correct return, and also so the balance and the fees for both investments and superannuation. So if you've got that, plug it in. The only thing outstanding is this model. So at the moment, we've got a single model. So we assume that both your superannuation and your investments are using the same strategic asset allocation. That's shortly going to change in 2 ways. The first is you'll be able to specify a reference model per portfolio effectively. So Avery's super may be rebalanced very differently to Morgan's. And we'll also be able to differentiate how that's going to be modeled between pre-retirement and post-retirement, just because typically people tend to get more conservative once they retire with their modeling. So really, it's only 3 pieces of information that you need to enter in. Mark kind of covered off, you know, retirement age, life expectancy. We use the OECD data for this. Obviously, you know, your clients are far better. Governance is going to capture a lot more information about their health details, whether they use nicotine products, whether they've got existing health issues and all the rest of it. That will all help kind of provide a better estimate. But this is up to you to specify. And as I mentioned before, in terms of the age of when the pension is paid from, that's up to the clients and for yourself as their professional to help them with. Obviously, if you've entered a value that is wrong, or rather is outside of the rules of Social Security, the engine will override your value and only allow payment to start at the point where Social Security rules allow you to access that. Very similarly to the income, in terms of the required retirement income, you can adjust this over time. So you will notice that, and you would have seen in the spreadsheet above, even though we started with $150,000, I'm actually saying that their income requirements are actually going to start to drop over time. In this particular case, 0.5% or 50 basis points. I'll skip over the allocation strategies and the business information and actually the household cash flow because Mark covered off that really well. But that's basically all you need to run everything. So if I kind of click on run just to show that the machine does what it's supposed to do, we'll get a little robot animation on here to kind of give you an insight into what's happening behind the scenes as it's running the 1000 Monte Carlo simulations. So very shortly, it should refresh. And in this particular case, we ended up with the same score. What we should end up with is a slightly different. So for those who are paying attention to the very small details, previously it was minus 401,000 in the likely case. It's now minus 416,000. So overall, the score is still largely the same. The $15,000 difference doesn't make much of a difference. But as you can see, because it's Monte Carlo, those values do change every single time you run it. So onto the slightly more interesting stuff. So now that we've run the base case, how do we start showing the value of advice, or what's the easiest way to kind of illustrate that advice? So in this particular case with Avery and Morgan, we saw that they didn't have enough cash to last them. And so we've had a discussion with them and we've said, okay, what can we do? And one of the points that we discussed with them was, are you able to save $1,000 a month? Can you put $1,000 a month aside in order to help fund your goals and your retirement? Luckily, because they're imaginary, they said yes. That discussion may not be quite as simple in real life, depending on who you're speaking to. But in this particular case, they were quite easy to convince. And so what we've put in is that they're going to be basically saving $12,000 annually. We've kept everything else the same, but then we've gone into the allocation strategies, and what we've actually said, and Mark talked about this, is we want to start looking at some debt management strategies. So in this particular case, we've said that we want to start paying down $5,000 a year. We don't want to pay it all off instantly, but we want to kind of start making a dent in it. In that $30,000 loan, so if for those that noticed, we've got a $30,000 personal debt up here, and we basically want to pay that off. We want to utilize $5,000 to start paying that off. But obviously, with any other excess cash that we have, we want to invest it. Now, interestingly, you will note that I've got a third option here, a third bucket that says to build cash savings, and it says to put $10,000 aside. Given the order of these, this will never get executed, just so that you know. And the reason why this will never get executed is because I've basically said put $100,000, put the absolute remainder into investments. If I wanted to make sure that I had a rainy day cash fund, I would have to put it ahead. So I could basically go pay $5,000 off any loans, put up to $10,000 in cash, and then if there's still anything left over at the end, invested. Likewise, from a shortfall strategy, I haven't made any changes in this particular case. I could start saying things like, let's take a look at a strategy around potentially downsizing or tapping into the home equity that you have in your property. All of that can be entered in. Everything has been kind of left the same. And so if we now run that projection, just as a comparison, go gadget, the robot will go off and do its own thing. So once again, it's just taking the new inputs, running it through the same capital market assumptions, running it through the same 1,000 iterations. And hopefully now with the additional cash inflow and debt strategies, we'll have a slightly different outcome. And so you can see here, our score has gone into the green. We're now on track. And the reason for that is because we do have, although small, we do have a surplus. So previously we were down 416,000. We're up 63,000. So we've almost made a $500,000 dent in it. But straight away, we're looking much better. So straight away, you can kind of go, that's a reasonably good strategy to get the client to where they need to be by just saving some money and also paying down their debts, which you can see on the report. The third scenario, which I'll show you very quickly, is one that we've also discussed in the previous webinar around other kinds of inputs that you may hear from clients. So in this particular case, Morgan has always wanted to take a career break, to take a year off, to study, to work, to try a hand at a hobby, whatever it may be. The easiest way to do that sort of input is to basically jump into the cash flow. And then here we can say, okay, at age 40, Morgan is going to take 12 months off work. And so therefore her salary is going to be zero. You'll notice that when I've done that, we've got a red error here because it's now saying that the income saved is a negative number, and effectively you can't spend more than you earn. So because we've kind of taken her income out, we need to adjust this figure to now be appropriate in order to still save them the $12,000 a year. But it may be also that actually, in addition to not earning any money, Morgan may need some additional money that year, for the travel, for the hobby, or whatever is being done that year. And so what you can do is you can say, okay, we're going to put in $80,000 for that particular year, and off we go. Just in the interest of time, just make sure that we've got a possibility to ask some questions. You'll see that when I ran this before, I got a very similar kind of output. So finally, the important thing is once you can create up to 5 of these scenarios, and you can allow the client to create their own. The beauty of doing that is that by allowing the clients to actually play around with these sorts of inputs, you get an insight into what they're thinking about. Are they thinking about changing jobs, taking time off, whatever it may be. We can click into, we've added this ability to compare projections. So if you click into that, it will show you the list of projections. I can compare the first 2 as an example and hit the comparison button. So very quickly, what this is doing is it's showing my base case. So if this person never saw a advice professional, where would they be? And post seeing that advice professional and employing some debt management and some savings scenarios, are they better off, worse off, and all the rest of it? And here you can very clearly see the value of advice being illustrated on the screen. So those scenarios can get as complex as you want them to be. You can run all 5 comparisons on this page. And obviously, as we start bringing out the governance module, the level of granularity that will be shown on here is only going to increase dramatically. So we're certainly looking forward to that. Over to you, Mark.
Awesome, Chris. We've got a good question in the chat here from Cam Howlett, and then I will probably ask some. But team, if there's any questions that you've got, any scenarios that you commonly get, you want to know how might I do that, flick them into the Q&A box and we'll get into them. But Cam's question, Chris, and maybe if you go back to the screen, and you might want to use the spreadsheet here, but when clients have investment properties, what's the growth rate that's applied? And say we want to model selling said investment property. When we sell it, is that amount in future value or present value cash?
So what happens if I flick across to the, sorry, I need to get out of this. When you are entering, if I flick across to the best case, go gadget. What happens when you click too many times? When you're entering in the value of the investment property or investment properties, there's that single field effectively in there. Sorry. The growth rate for the investment property itself is the same as your principal place of residence, and that is the national average. So I believe it's 6.8% from memory for Australia over the last 25 years. Obviously, that changes regionally, which is why we wanted to get governance in place relatively quickly. That way, we can apply the the Queensland or Brisbane versus the Melbourne or Sydney rates, which are obviously quite different to Adelaide, for example. So by default, it will automatically apply the national average growth rate to it. And what was the second part of the question, Mark? Sorry.
So if we sold it and we wanted to represent in the best life scenario, 10 years time, we sell it and clear an amount of money, how do we represent it, and does it get represented in present value or future value?
It automatically is on future value. So it uses it accounts for inflation over time, so it's current value, but obviously it's kind of calculated in there. The one limitation we do have, and just as a call out, there's no simple way at the moment to say, if I've got an investment property of 500,000, let's say, there's no way at the moment for you to say sell it in 10 years time. That's something that we need to add in, and we're all ears for that sort of functionality. At the moment, the only time that this investment property will be sold is if in the allocation strategies under here, you basically go, yes, I want to, once I'm running out of cash, sell down that investment property in order to fund the fact that I'm running out of cash. But that's certainly something that we could build in relatively easily, in the same way that we've done the business. Yeah,
nice. On the same line of questioning, retirement income amount. Obviously, we're putting in the amount today. Is that amount represented in current value, adjusted for inflation? In say if I'm 20, 30 years away from retirement.
Correct. Yeah. So everything that you enter in is in current values. The engine automatically adjusts for inflation over time, so you don't have to worry about that. So, which is why rather than showing you that your $1 million property is going to be worth $50 million in 50 years, it's a bit more realistic. I think it comes out to 11 or 12.
I don't know, it might be in a really high growth suburb.
It could be.
And if you do know the suburb, let us know.
Yeah.
So on property, a really common question we get is, I'm working with clients that are looking to purchase investment properties or purchase that dream home. How might I represent that? Now, I touched on this a little bit earlier by saying in the goal, the best way to represent it is represent the goal as a lump sum. Which is your immediate deposit. If you're using a deposit for an investment property, if you're not, because you're using equity, then you could probably just have it as a non-financial goal and say, I want to purchase the investment property at X date. But from the mortgage increase, Chris, how do we offset that in the cash flow projections?
Yeah, so this is another limitation that we have at present. So as Mark mentions, exactly right. If you're expecting to buy assets of any kind in the future, put them in as goals, but only put in the amount that you're going to need in order to initially fund the purchase of that. And that's usually the deposit amount. We're expecting to have governance in place by July. Which means that at that point, the goals functionality will get a lot more sophisticated in that it will actually be able to break down not only the deposit amount, but obviously the mortgage, so the liability that is associated with that asset, as well as potentially an income stream off it. So if you are buying investment property, you can say, in 5 years' time, I'm going to buy something for $1 million. It's going to cost me $150,000 up front. The rest is going to be in is going to be in a P&I loan at X%, and it's going to earn me $730 per week of rent. And then once again, all of that information will then feed through to the engine. At the moment, because we don't have those inputs, the best thing to do is just to put in the deposit amount that you need for that property. It obviously won't do any debt management for it, but it will at least kind of from a pure cash flow point of view, give you an understanding of what changes you need to make in order to have those funds available.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. No other questions have come through, and we've just ticked over 10:01 a.m. So in the interest of respecting everyone's calendars, we'll draw the webinar to a close. As always, please feel free to email any questions through or give us any feedback on the tool itself. We're all ears. From where we had it a month ago to where it is now, the functionality you can see is already increased. The tool is having some amazing conversations with clients that we hear every day. So hopefully today has given you enough information for you to go and have the same sort of conversations and help your clients answer if they're on track or off track and need your help. So thank you for dialing in. Please stay and get us through the feedback survey that will come through as well. We'd love your feedback, and email through any sort of questions or answers that you want us to sort of cover in future webinars or for your own little scenario. So thanks for dialing in, everyone, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.